The journey began on a crisp autumn morning when Jaden Thomas and his mother, Dr. Lisa Thomas, headed to the airport. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink as their taxi pulled up to the departures terminal. Jaden, an 8-year-old with curious eyes and a mind that never stopped working, clutched his favorite book about famous court cases throughout history. "You got everything, sweetie?" Dr. Thomas asked, checking her own bags for her medical conference. "Presentation notes." "Yes, Mom," Jaden replied, patting his backpack. "I brought my notebook and my tablet, too." Unlike most kids his age who packed video games or action figures, Jaden never traveled without his collection of legal books. Ever since his grandfather, a retired judge with 40 years on the bench, had started sharing stories about his courtroom days, Jaden had been fascinated by the law. While his classmates spent weekends watching cartoons, Jaden could often be found sitting beside Grandpa Richard, absorbing documentaries about landmark Supreme Court cases. The airport was buzzing with early morning travelers. As they waited, in the security line, Jaden observed the TSA officers and whispered to his mother, "Did you know they have to follow specific protocols when checking our bags? Grandpa says it's to protect our Fourth Amendment rights." Dr. Thomas smiled, used to her son's surprising knowledge. A single mother and respected hospital administrator, she had always encouraged Jaden's intellectual curiosity, even when it took unusual directions for someone so young. After clearing security, they found their gate where a crowd had already gathered for the Chicago-bound flight. "We're in seats 14A and B," Dr. Thomas told Jaden as they waited to board. "Window and middle, just like you like." Jaden beamed. He loved watching the clouds and trying to identify the cities they flew over. It was like a geography lesson in the sky. When their boarding group was called, they filed onto the plane with the other passengers. Jaden politely greeted the flight attendants as he boarded, a habit his grandfather had taught him. "Always show respect to everyone you meet," Grandpa Richard would say. "Doesn't matter if they're a judge or a janitor." They found their seats, and Jaden immediately reached for the safety card in the seat pocket, reading it carefully even though he practically had it memorized from previous flights. "You never know when they might update the regulations," he explained seriously to his mother, who tried not to laugh at his earnestness. As other passengers settled around them, Jaden pulled out his notebook and began drawing what looked like a courtroom layout. Dr. Thomas took out her conference papers, reviewing her presentation on improving hospital administration systems in underserved communities. The flight attendants began their pre-flight routine, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. Jaden watched them with interest, occasionally making notes. "What are you writing now?" his mother asked, peeking at his notebook. "I'm documenting the safety procedures," Jaden explained. "Grandpa says documentation is important in any situation." A man in a business suit across the aisle noticed Jaden's serious expression and smiled. "You going to be a lawyer when you grow up, young man?" "Maybe," Jaden replied thoughtfully. "Or maybe a judge like my grandpa. I want to help people understand their rights." The man looked impressed and a bit surprised. It wasn't the typical answer you'd expect from a child. As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, Jaden gazed out the window, eyes wide with excitement. Though he'd flown several times before, the thrill of takeoff never diminished. He loved the moment when the wheels left the ground and the buildings below became tiny models. "Look, Mom," he said, pointing to the wing. "Did you know the flaps change position during different phases of flight? It's all about aerodynamics and lift." Dr. Thomas nodded, always amazed by the range of her son's knowledge. One day it was legal precedents, the next aeronautical engineering. His mind was like a sponge, absorbing information from every book, documentary, and conversation he encountered. The plane climbed higher, and once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants began preparing for drink service. Jaden pulled out his tablet, opening a documentary about the history of civil rights legislation that he'd downloaded for the flight. Dr. Thomas leaned over. "Are you sure you don't want to watch something more fun? I downloaded that new animated movie you mentioned." Jaden shook his head. "This is interesting, Mom. Plus, Grandpa and I are going to discuss it when we call him tomorrow." Their peaceful journey continued for about 30 minutes. Jayden was deeply absorbed in his documentary, occasionally making notes in his small, neat handwriting. Dr. Thomas had dozed off beside him, tired from her late night preparing for the conference. Then, from a few rows behind, raised voices broke the calm hum of the airplane engines. "I don't care what the ticket says. I want a window seat." Jayden looked up, curious about the commotion. A passenger was arguing with a flight attendant, his voice getting louder with each exchange. "Sir, I understand you're uncomfortable, but all passengers must sit in their assigned seats," the flight attendant explained patiently. "This is ridiculous. There are window seats available. I can see them." The man continued, standing up now, despite the seatbelt sign having illuminated again due to some light turbulence. Jayden watched as the flight attendant tried to de-escalate the situation. His grandfather had taught him about the importance of remaining calm during conflicts, and he admired how the flight attendant maintained her composure. The situation seemed to settle briefly, but 10 minutes later, the man was on his feet again, this time moving through the cabin looking at seat numbers. When he reached their row, he stopped abruptly. "This is what I'm talking about," he said loudly, pointing at Jayden and his mother. "A kid with a window seat. Kids don't even appreciate the view." Dr. Thomas, now awake, shifted uncomfortably as the man loomed over them. "Sir, please return to your seat," called a flight attendant who had followed him. "Not until I get a window seat." "Hey, lady," he addressed Dr. Thomas directly, his breath smelling strongly of alcohol. "How about you and your kid move so someone who actually paid good money for this flight can enjoy the view?" Dr. Thomas straightened her shoulders. "I'm sorry you're unhappy with your seat assignment, but we're not moving. We booked these seats specifically." Jayden felt a knot forming in his stomach. He didn't like seeing his mother uncomfortable, and he especially didn't like the way this man was talking to her. His grandfather had always taught him to stand up, for what was right, but also to be strategic about it. The man's face reddened. "Do you know who I am? I fly this route every week. The airline should be giving priority to their frequent flyers, not some woman and her kid on vacation." "We're not on vacation," Jayden said quietly, though no one seemed to hear him over the escalating argument. 2 more flight attendants joined the first, trying to convince the man to return to his seat. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, making the confrontation even more dangerous. "Sir, for safety reasons you need to sit down immediately," the lead flight attendant insisted. "Not until they move," the man said stubbornly, pointing at Jayden and his mother. "Put them in my middle. Seat in the back, I'm sure they don't mind." The flight attendants exchanged glances, clearly trying to resolve the situation as quickly as possible for safety reasons. One of them turned to Dr. Thomas. "Ma'am, I know this isn't fair, but would you mind?" And that's when Jayden's world seemed to slow down. He saw the resignation in his mother's eyes, the same look she'd had when they were turned away from a restaurant reservation last year, despite arriving on time. The same look she wore when she was passed over for a promotion at the hospital, despite having the most experience. Jayden thought of all the stories his grandfather had told him, about standing up, about knowing your rights, about doing it the right way. He took a deep breath, undid his seatbelt, and stood up. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as Jayden stood up, his small frame barely reaching the height of the overhead bins. Despite his size, there was something in his posture that commanded attention. The angry passenger, mid-sentence in his demands, paused and looked down at the boy. "Excuse me," Jayden said, his voice clear but polite. "I don't think you should be asking us to move," the man snorted. "Kid, the adults are talking here." "Jayden, sit down," Dr. Thomas whispered, gently tugging at his sleeve. She looked worried, not wanting her son involved in this uncomfortable situation. But Jayden remained standing. His grandfather had always told him that sometimes you had to speak up, especially when something wasn't right. "Actually, sir, I'd like to explain something about airline regulations, if that's okay." A few passengers nearby turned their heads. The flight attendants exchanged surprised glances. "Airline regulations?" the man repeated, his tone mocking. "What would you know about that?" Jayden took a deep breath. According to the Federal Aviation Administration guidelines, airlines must honor assigned seating unless there's a safety issue. My grandfather is a judge, and he taught me that when we buy tickets, we enter into a contract with the airline. The cabin grew quieter. Even passengers who had been pretending not to notice the disruption were now watching openly. A contract? The man's face reddened further. Listen, kid. It's true, Jaden continued, his voice gaining confidence. The Department of Transportation has rules about this. When the airline assigned these seats to us and we paid for them, they made a promise. Breaking that promise because someone else wants our seats isn't fair or legal. Dr. Thomas looked at her son with a mixture of pride and concern. She hadn't expected him to remember so many details from his conversations with Grandpa Richard. The lead flight attendant stepped closer. Young man, where did you learn all this? Jaden turned to her respectfully. My grandpa has law books at his house. We read them together on weekends. He says knowing your rights is important. Another flight attendant was now speaking into a phone, presumably talking to the captain. The disruptive passenger wasn't backing down easily. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to be lectured by some kid. Jaden reached into his backpack and pulled out his tablet. He tapped the screen a few times and then held it up. Look, I downloaded the Passenger Rights Handbook last night. It says right here that airlines can't make passengers change seats unless it's for safety or balance reasons. Several nearby passengers murmured in surprise. A woman across the aisle gave Jaden a thumbs up. The man glanced at the tablet screen, which indeed showed an official-looking document. That doesn't apply here. Actually, it does, Jaden replied. He scrolled down on his tablet. It also says that if a passenger is disruptive, the crew can take necessary steps to ensure flight safety. Being disruptive includes refusing to follow crew instructions, like when they asked you to stay in your assigned seat. By now, several passengers had taken out their phones, some appearing to record the exchange, others looking up the regulations Jaden was citing. The lead flight attendant spoke up again. The young man is correct, sir. We cannot make other passengers give up their assigned seats to accommodate your preferences. Now I need to ask you one more time to return to your seat. The man looked around, suddenly aware that everyone was watching him. His expression shifted from anger to embarrassment. I just wanted a window seat, he muttered. I understand wanting to look out the window, Jaden said, his tone softening. Maybe next time you can request one when you book your ticket. My mom always books our tickets early so we can sit together by the window. A few passengers chuckled, not unkindly. The tension in the cabin began to dissipate. Dr. Thomas gently placed her hand on Jaden's shoulder. That's enough now, sweetie. Thank you for speaking up. The man finally turned away, moving back toward his assigned seat, escorted by one of the flight attendants. The other flight attendant stayed behind, looking at Jaden with new interest. I've been flying for 15 years, said one, shaking her head in amazement. And I've never seen anything like this. How old are you, sweetheart? I'm 8, Jaden replied, sitting back down. Almost 9. And you know all this about airline regulations? Jaden nodded. Grandpa says knowledge is like a superpower. You can help people with it. The lead flight attendant knelt beside their row. The captain would like to thank you for helping restore order. Your understanding of the rules made our job easier today. Dr. Thomas smiled proudly at her son. He absorbs everything he reads. His grandfather has been teaching him about the law since he was 5. As the flight attendants moved away to continue their service, passengers from nearby rows leaned over to compliment Jaden. That was impressive, young man. You handled that better than most adults would have. An elderly woman reached across the aisle to pat his hand. You reminded me of my grandson. He's in law school now. Keep it up, and you'll be there someday too. Jaden blushed at all the attention, not used to being the center of it. I just didn't want my mom to have to move. It wasn't fair. Dr. Thomas put her arm around him. You stood up for what's right, and you did it respectfully. That's exactly what Grandpa Richard has been teaching you. As the flight continued, the story of what happened spread throughout the cabin. Flight attendants coming from the back of the plane would find reasons to pass by their row, smiling at Jayden or giving him a wink. About an hour into the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I understand we had a bit of a situation earlier, but thanks to the help of one of our youngest passengers, everything has been resolved smoothly. It just goes to show that knowledge and courtesy can go a long way at any age. We'll be beginning our descent into Chicago in about 30 minutes. Weather at our destination is clear and sunny, perfect for looking out those windows." Several passengers laughed and looked toward Jayden, who sank slightly in his seat, both embarrassed and pleased. A flight attendant approached their row with 2 cups. "Apple juice for our legal expert," she said, handing one to Jayden, "and coffee for his mom. On the house." "Thank you," Jayden said, taking the juice. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," the flight attendant replied. "What happens to passengers who don't follow the rules? Does the airline have specific procedures?" The flight attendant smiled. "We do, actually. Depending on the severity, there can be warnings being met by airport security upon landing, or even being added to a no-fly list for serious offenses." Jayden nodded seriously, filing away this new information. "That makes sense. There have to be consequences for breaking rules, or people wouldn't follow them." The flight attendant looked at Dr. Thomas. "Your son is remarkable." "He certainly is," Dr. Thomas agreed, squeezing Jayden's shoulder. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Jayden returned to looking out the window, watching the landscape below grow from tiny patches to recognizable buildings and roads. The earlier tension had completely dissipated, replaced by a sense of community among the passengers. The man who had caused the disruption remained in his seat for the rest of the flight, occasionally glancing toward Jayden with what looked like reluctant respect. When the wheels touched down at O'Hare International Airport, many passengers broke into a spontaneous round of applause, partly for the smooth landing, but many were looking toward Jayden as they clapped. As they taxied to the gate, Dr. Thomas leaned over and kissed the top of Jayden's head. "I'm so proud of you, but I'm also curious. Where did you really learn all that about airline regulations? I don't remember Grandpa having books about that." Jayden grinned sheepishly. "Remember last month when our flight got delayed and I was bored in the airport? There was that bookstore and they had a passenger rights guide. I asked if I could get it instead of a comic book." Dr. Thomas laughed, shaking her head in wonder. "Only you would choose an airline regulation book over a comic. What am I going to do with you?" "Take me to see the courthouse in Chicago after your conference," Jayden suggested hopefully. "Grandpa says it's really beautiful inside." "Deal," Dr. Thomas said, as the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began standing to retrieve their luggage. Little did they know, their adventure was just beginning. As passengers began to file out of the plane, something unusual happened. Rather than rushing to grab their bags and hurry off as usual, many people let Jayden and his mother go ahead of them. One businessman even helped Dr. Thomas retrieve her carry-on from the overhead bin. "That's quite a son you have there," he said with a genuine smile. "I'm a corporate attorney and he knew those regulations better than I do." Dr. Thomas thanked him, still processing everything that had happened. She held Jayden's hand as they walked through the jet bridge, noticing how people continued to glance at them with warm smiles. In the terminal, a surprise awaited them. A woman in an airline uniform stood near the gate desk, holding a small sign with their names. Next to her was a man in a pilot's uniform with captain's stripes on his shoulders. "Dr. Thomas and Jayden?" the woman asked as they approached. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez, the customer service manager for this terminal. This is Captain Richardson, who is flying your plane today. He asked to meet you both personally." Jayden's eyes widened. Meeting the actual captain of the plane wasn't something that happened every day. Captain Richardson extended his hand first to Dr. Thomas, then, with a special formality, to Jayden. "Young man, I've been flying for 23 years and I've never had a passenger handle a situation quite like you did today." Jayden shook the captain's hand firmly, just as his grandfather had taught him. "Thank you, sir. I just remembered what my grandpa told me about standing up for what's right." "Well, your grandfather must be quite a man," the captain said. "Our lead flight attendant radioed the situation to me, and I was about to request, "Air marshals, meet the plane." But then she told me how you diffused everything with just knowledge and politeness. Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward. "The airline would like to offer you both an upgrade to first class on your return flight. And," she added, handing Jaden a small package, "we have something special for you." Jaden carefully opened the package to find a set of plastic pilot's wings and a certificate naming him an honorary flight crew member. "Wow," he breathed, running his fingers over the wings. "Thank you. We'd also like to invite you to visit the cockpit of the aircraft before your return flight, if you're interested," Captain Richardson offered. "Really? That would be amazing." Jaden could hardly contain his excitement. As they thanked the airline staff and continued toward baggage claim, Dr. Thomas noticed a small crowd had formed nearby. A woman with a press's badge and a man with a camera approached them. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I'm Kelly Wong from the Chicago Tribune. Passengers from your flight have been sharing a remarkable story about an 8-year-old boy who knew airline regulations better than the staff. Would that be you?" She looked at Jaden with a friendly smile. Jaden looked up at his mother, uncertain. Dr. Thomas hesitated, protective of her son and wary of unexpected attention. "It's just for a local interest piece, Ms. Wong explained. People love stories about exceptional kids." After a brief discussion with Jaden to make sure he was comfortable, Dr. Thomas agreed to a short interview while they waited for their luggage. "So, Jaden," Ms. Wong began, "how did you know so much about passenger rights on airplanes?" Jaden explained about his grandfather, the judge, and his own interest in learning about different kinds of laws. "I think it's important for people to know their rights," he said, "even kids." "And what made you decide to speak up today?" Jaden thought for a moment. "The man was being mean to my mom, and the flight attendants seemed like they might make us move just to keep him quiet. That didn't seem fair." Ms. Wong nodded, taking notes. "So you stood up for what was right even though you were the youngest person involved?" "Age doesn't really matter when something's not right," Jaden said with the simple certainty of a child. "My grandpa says justice doesn't check your birthday, the Reporter's eyebrows raised at this quote, and she quickly wrote it down. After a few more questions and a photo of Jaden with his new pilot wings, she thanked them and left. "You handled that very well," Dr. Thomas told him as they finally collected their suitcases. "I'm proud of how you spoke up, both on the plane and just now." Jaden beamed at his mother's praise. "Do you think Grandpa will see the newspaper article?" "I'll make sure he does," Dr. Thomas promised, already planning to call her father as soon as they reached the hotel. Outside the terminal, they caught a taxi to their downtown hotel. Jaden pressed his face against the window, taking in the impressive Chicago skyline. The building seemed to stretch up forever, making him feel tiny but also filled with wonder. "Look at those skyscrapers," he exclaimed. "Did you know the Willis Tower used to be called the Sears Tower? It was the tallest building in the world for almost 25 years. The taxi driver chuckled. "You're right about that, young man. You a Chicago expert too?" "No, sir," Jaden replied. "I just read a lot." "He sure does," Dr. Thomas confirmed with a smile. At the hotel, they were surprised again when the front desk clerk said, "Oh, Dr. Thomas and Jaden, we've been expecting you. The airline called ahead and mentioned we have a very special guest, the Y." Clerk handed them their room key cards with a wink to Jaden. "We've upgraded you to a corner room on the 25th floor. It has an excellent view of the city and the lake." As they rode the elevator up, Dr. Thomas looked at her son with amazement. "Jaden Thomas, you are having quite a day." The room was indeed spectacular, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing a panoramic view of Chicago and Lake Michigan. Jaden ran straight to the windows, pressing his hands against the glass as he took it all in. "Mom, look at all the boats on the water. And you can see so many streets and buildings." Dr. Thomas set down their bags and joined him at the window. For a moment, they just stood together, taking in the view. "I'm going to call Grandpa," she said finally, pulling out her phone. "He won't believe what happened today." While his mother talked to his grandfather, Jaden explored the room, examining everything with his usual curiosity. He found a room service menu and studied it carefully, particularly interested in the dessert section. "Grandpa wants to talk to you," Dr. Thomas called, holding out the phone. Jayden took it eagerly. "Grandpa, guess what happened on the plane?" He launched into the story, giving his grandfather all the details about the disruptive passenger, the regulations he'd cited, and how everyone had reacted. His grandfather listened attentively, asking questions at just the right moments. "I used what you taught me about staying calm and using knowledge instead of getting angry," Jayden explained proudly. "That's exactly right," his grandfather's deep voice came through the phone. "Knowledge is always the best tool, and you used it well. I'm very proud of you, Jayden." After they hung up, Dr. Thomas suggested they get something to eat. "The medical conference doesn't start until tomorrow morning, so we have the rest of the day to ourselves. What would you like to do after lunch?" "Can we go to the Museum of Science and Industry?" Jayden asked hopefully. "They have a real submarine there that you can go inside." "That sounds perfect," Dr. Thomas agreed. "Let's head downstairs and find some lunch first." In the hotel restaurant they had just ordered when a man approached their table. He wore a suit and had a friendly but professional demeanor. "Excuse me, I'm Robert Chen, the hotel manager. I just wanted to welcome you personally and make sure everything in your room is satisfactory." "Everything is wonderful, thank you," Dr. Thomas assured him. Mr. Chen smiled at Jayden. "I understand you're quite the legal expert. My daughter is studying law at Northwestern University here in Chicago. She's working on a project about consumer rights in the transportation industry. Would it be all right if I mentioned you to her? She might want to include your story." "Sure," Jayden said, surprised that adults were interested in his opinion. "Excellent. Enjoy your meal, and please let me know if you need anything during your stay." Mr. Chen handed Dr. Thomas his card before departing. As they ate their lunch, Dr. Thomas noticed Jayden was quieter than usual. "What's on your mind, sweetie?" Jayden poked at his French fries. "Mom, do you think I did the right thing on the plane? The man seemed really mad at me." Dr. Thomas reached across the table and took his hand. "You absolutely did the right thing. You stood up for us politely, using facts instead of anger. That's exactly how problems should be solved. But what if no one had believed me? What if they thought I was just a kid making things up? That's always a risk when you stand up for what's right," she acknowledged. "But you had the facts on your side. And even if they hadn't believed you, I would have been proud of you for trying." Jayden nodded, considering this. "Grandpa says, sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it." "Your grandpa is a very wise man," Dr. Thomas smiled. "Now finish your lunch so we can go see that submarine." The rest of the afternoon flew by as they explored the museum. Jayden was fascinated by everything, but especially the U-505 submarine. As they walked through its narrow corridors, Jayden read every information panel, absorbing facts about World War II naval operations. "Did you know this submarine was captured by the U.S. Navy in 1944? He told his mother excitedly. "They kept it a secret so the Germans wouldn't know their codebooks had been captured." By the time they returned to the hotel that evening, they were both exhausted but happy. As Jayden got ready for bed, Dr. Thomas sat on the edge of his bed. "You know what I realized today?" she said softly. "What?" Jayden asked, climbing under the covers. "That all those hours you spend reading and learning things that seem so grown up, they're not just preparing you for someday in the future. That knowledge is valuable right now, today." Jayden smiled sleepily. "I just like knowing things, Mom." "I know you do, sweetie." She leaned down to kiss his forehead. "And because you like knowing things, you were able to help not just us, but everyone on that plane today. Knowledge is power, just like Grandpa always says." As Jayden drifted off to sleep, he thought about the day's events and felt a warm glow of pride. He hadn't set out to be a hero or to impress anyone. He just wanted to protect his mom and make sure things were fair. Little did he know, his adventure was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to take flight. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hotel room windows, gently waking Jayden. For a moment, he forgot where he was until the spectacular view of Chicago came into focus. He sat up in bed watching boats move across Lake Michigan like tiny toys. Dr. Thomas was already up, dressed in a professional suit for her conference. She was on the phone, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. When she noticed Jayden was awake, she said, "He's up now. I'll ask him," and covered the phone with her hand. "Good morning, sweetie. That story about what happened on the plane yesterday? It's gone viral." Jayden blinked, confused. "What does viral mean?" "It means a lot of people are sharing it online," she explained. "That reporter from the Chicago Tribune wrote an article about you, and apparently someone on the plane posted a video. Now a local TV station wants to interview you." "Me? On TV?" Jayden's eyes widened. Dr. Thomas nodded. "This is Kelly Wong from the newspaper again. She says the morning show wants to have you on as a guest, but you absolutely don't have to do it if you don't want to." Jayden thought about it. He wasn't sure how he felt about being on television, but his grandfather always said that when you have knowledge, it's good to share it with others. "Would I have to miss the courthouse visit?" "No, they could do it early before my conference. Sessions start." "Then okay," Jayden decided. "If you think it's all right." Dr. Thomas spoke into the phone again, making arrangements while Jayden got dressed and brushed his teeth. As he was putting on his shoes, there was a knock at the door. "Doctor." Thomas opened it to find a hotel employee with a tray. "Compliment. Antery breakfast for our special guests," the young woman said with a smile. "The chef heard about your son and wanted to make his famous chocolate chip pancakes for him. The pancakes were delicious, shaped like airplanes with bacon strips as runways." Jayden ate happily while his mother explained the plan for the morning. "The TV station is sending a car for us at 8. They'll interview you for about 5 minutes, and then we'll head to the conference center. I need to be at my panel by 10, but I've arranged for a conference volunteer to take you on that courthouse tour while I'm busy." "Will I get to see real judges?" Jayden asked excitedly. "If there are cases being heard today, yes," she promised. An hour later, they were sitting in the bright lights of a television studio. Jayden had been given a quick tour of the equipment and introduced to the hosts, a friendly man and woman, who asked him if he was nervous. "A little," he admitted. "But my grandpa says being nervous just means you care about doing a good job." "That's very wise," the female host said, adjusting her microphone. "We're going to start in about 1 minute, okay? Just be yourself and answer however feels right." The light seemed to get even brighter as someone counted down. 3, 2, 1. "Good morning, Chicago. We have a very special guest with us today," the male host began. 8-year-old Jayden Thomas made headlines yesterday when he stood up to a disruptive passenger on a flight by citing airline regulations and passenger rights. "Jayden, welcome to the show." The camera turned to Jayden, who sat up straighter in his chair. "Thank you for having me," he said, remembering his manners. "Jayden, can you tell our viewers what happened yesterday on that flight?" the female host asked. Jayden took a deep breath and told the story, explaining how the passenger had demanded their window seats and how he'd felt when the flight attendants considered moving them. "And how did you know so much about airline regulations?" the male host asked, clearly impressed. "My grandpa is a retired judge," Jayden explained. "He taught me that knowledge is important, especially about your rights. So I read a lot. I actually read a passenger rights handbook at the airport bookstore last month because our flight was delayed and I was bored." The hosts exchanged amazed glances. "Most kids would have played games or watched videos," the female host commented. Jayden shrugged. "I like learning things. It's like collecting treasure, but it's treasure you can use to help people." This answer seemed to delight the hosts, who asked a few more questions about his interests and what he wanted to be when he grew up. "I think I'd like to be a judge like my grandpa," Jayden said thoughtfully. "Or maybe work for an organization that helps people understand their rights. A lot of people don't know what they're allowed to do or not do." "Well, Jayden, I think you've got a bright future ahead of you," the male host concluded. "Thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for showing us all that you're never too young to stand up for what's right," the female host added. After the interview, several staff members came over to shake Jayden's hand and tell him what a great job he'd done. One producer even asked if he'd be interested in coming back someday for a children's special about knowing your rights. As promised, a car took them to the conference center where Dr. Thomas's medical administration panel was being held. In the lobby, they met Ryan, a university student volunteering at the conference. "I'll be your guide for the courthouse tour," he told Jaden with a friendly smile. "My dad actually works there as a clerk, so I know all the best parts to see." Dr. Thomas knelt to give Jaden a hug before her panel. "Be good for Ryan, okay? I'll meet you back here for lunch at 12:30. "I will," Jaden promised. "Good luck with your presentation." The courthouse was only a short walk from the conference center. As they approached the imposing building with its tall columns and grand staircase, Jaden felt a thrill of excitement. This was where justice happened, where the principles his grandfather had taught him came to life. "Wow," he breathed as they climbed the steps. "It looks like the buildings in Washington, D.C. "It was built in the 1930s, Ryan explained. "They wanted it to look impressive to show respect for the law." Inside, the main hall was even more spectacular, with high ceilings, marble floors, and walls lined with portraits of past judges. Ryan led Jaden through security and then gave him a tour of the public areas, explaining the different types of courts housed in the building. "We're in luck today," Ryan said as they checked a schedule. "There's a civil case being heard in courtroom 302 that's open to the public. Want to watch for a bit?" Jaden nodded eagerly. They quietly entered the courtroom and found seats at the back. The room was formal and hushed, with dark wood paneling and the state and American flags flanking the judge's bench. A woman in a black robe presided over the proceedings, listening intently as lawyers presented their arguments. Jaden watched, fascinated by the formality and the careful way everyone chose their words. He recognized some legal terms from his reading and his grandfather's explanations. When the judge called for a 15-minute recess, Ryan suggested they step out to get a drink of water. In the hallway, they ran into a group of law students who were observing the same case. One of them noticed Jaden. "Hey, aren't you that kid from the plane, the one who knew all the airline regulations? I saw you on TV this morning." Jaden nodded, suddenly shy with so many older students looking at him. "That was really cool," another student said. "I'm in my second year of law school and I don't even know all those regulations." Their professor, a distinguished-looking woman with silver hair, joined them. "What's this about airline regulations?" The students explained who Jaden was, and the professor looked at him with interest. "Well, young man, it sounds like you might have a future in law. Have you considered it?" "Yes, ma'am," Jaden replied. "My grandpa is a judge." "Is that so? And what court does he preside over?" As Jaden explained about his grandfather's career, more people gathered around, including a court clerk who had also seen the morning news. Word spread quickly, and soon a small crowd had formed, all curious about the young legal prodigy. Then, something unexpected happened. A side door opened and the judge from the courtroom they'd been observing stepped out. Noticing the gathering, she walked over. "What's all the excitement about?" she asked, her judicial dignity softened by a kind smile. The professor explained, and the judge looked at Jaden with new interest. "So you're the young man I heard about on the radio this morning. Quite impressive." "Thank you, Your Honor," Jaden said respectfully, just as his grandfather had taught him to address judges. The judge seemed pleased by his proper etiquette. "Would you and your guide like to see my chambers? It's not every day we get a visit from someone who might be sitting on this bench someday." Jaden could hardly believe his luck. "Really? We can see where you work?" "Absolutely," the judge said. "Follow me." The judge's chambers were everything Jaden had imagined. Walls lined with law books, a large desk covered with case files, and a window overlooking the city. The judge showed him where she wrote her opinions and explained how she researched the law for difficult cases. "The most important thing a judge needs," she told him seriously, "is a commitment to fairness. The law is complicated, but justice should be simple. Everyone deserves to be treated equally and with respect." "That's what my grandpa says too," Jaden nodded. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man," the judge replied. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wooden gavel. This was given to me when I was first appointed to the bench. I'd like you to have it. Jaden's eyes widened. Really? But isn't it special to you? It is, the judge acknowledged. But I think it will inspire you more than it will me at this point in my career. Consider it passing the torch to the next generation. Carefully, almost reverently, Jaden accepted the small gavel. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll take good care of it. Before they left the courthouse, several other legal professionals stopped them to shake Jaden's hand or take photos with him. One young lawyer even asked him to sign her copy of the Passenger Rights Handbook, the same one Jaden had. Read at the airport, "You're a celebrity," Ryan laughed as they walked back to the conference center. Jaden shook his head. I just knew some facts that helped my mom. I didn't do anything special. But that's what makes it special, Ryan pointed out. You used knowledge to solve a problem when adults couldn't. That's pretty cool. As they approached the conference center, Jaden spotted his mother waiting outside. He ran to her, eager to share his amazing morning. Mom, you won't believe what happened. I got to meet a real judge and see her chambers, and she gave me this gavel and said, I might be sitting on the bench someday, and there were law students who recognized me, and Dr. Thomas laughed, hugging him tight. Slow down. That sounds incredible. But guess what? I have some news, too. The airline called the conference center looking for us. They want to offer you something special. Jaden's eyes widened. What is it? They want you to help them create a kid-friendly version of their passenger rights information, she explained. They think you could help make it easier for young people to understand their rights when traveling. Jaden's jaw dropped. They want my help? Really? Dr. Thomas nodded, her eyes shining with pride. Really? It seems your little moment on that plane is turning into something. Much bigger. As they walked into the conference center together, Jaden clutched his new gavel tightly. What had started as a simple stand for fairness was becoming an unexpected journey, one that might shape not just his future, but the futures of other kids too. And it all began because he'd taken his grandfather's lessons to heart. Knowledge was power, and using that power to help others was the greatest thing anyone could do, no matter how old they were. The final day of their Chicago trip dawned bright and clear. Jaden woke up early, still clutching the small wooden gavel the judge had given him. He carefully placed it on the nightstand and went to the window, watching the city come to life below. The past 2 days had been like a dream, from standing up on the plane to being interviewed on television to meeting a real judge and receiving an incredible offer from the airline. Dr. Thomas emerged from the bathroom, already dressed for the last day of her conference. Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well? Uh-huh. Jaden nodded, turning from the window. Mom, do you think I could really help the airline make rules easier for kids to understand? She sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing the covers. I absolutely do. You have a gift for taking complicated information and making sense of it. That's rare, even for adults. Jaden considered this. Grandpa always says the law doesn't have to be confusing. It's just that people use big words to make it sound more important. Your grandpa is right, Dr. Thomas smiled. And that's exactly why the airline wants your help. You can translate those big words into something everyone can understand. After breakfast, they headed to the conference center one last time. While Dr. Thomas attended her final panel, Jaden was scheduled to meet with representatives from the airline in one of the small meeting rooms. Remember, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, Dr. Thomas reminded him as they walked through the lobby. If you feel overwhelmed, just ask to take a break or have me join you. I'll be okay, Jaden assured her, though his stomach fluttered with butterflies. Will you come find me when your panel is finished? The second it's over, she promised, giving him a quick hug before heading toward the main conference hall. A conference volunteer escorted Jaden to the meeting room where 2 people were waiting, a woman in a crisp airline uniform and a man in a business suit. They both stood when Jaden entered. Jaden, it's wonderful to meet you, the woman said warmly, extending her hand. I'm Diane Powell, Vice President of Customer Experience for the airline. This is Greg Henderson, our legal counsel. Hello, Jaden said politely, shaking their hands with the firm grip his grandfather had taught him. "Nice to meet you." They all sat down at the round table, and Diane slid a folder across to Jayden. "We brought our current passenger rights materials to show you. This is what we give to travelers now." Jayden opened the folder to find several glossy brochures filled with tiny text and legal terminology. He flipped through them with interest, noting how dense and complicated they were. "What do you think?" Greg asked, watching Jayden's face. "Well," Jayden began carefully, not wanting to be rude, "they have a lot of information, but they're not very kid-friendly?" Diane suggested with a knowing smile. "Not really," Jayden admitted. "And I don't think they're very adult-friendly, either. There are too many big words and the important stuff is hard to find." Greg chuckled. "That's exactly what we were thinking. Legal requirements mean we need to include all this information, but we could definitely present it better." "That's where you come in," Diane explained. "We'd like to create a new version of these materials that's easy for everyone to understand. Kids, parents, people who don't speak English as their first language, everyone. Your grandfather has taught you about the law, and you clearly have a talent for understanding complex rules. We think you could help us see these materials through fresh eyes." Jayden sat up straighter, feeling both important and a little overwhelmed. "What would I need to do?" "We'd like to set up a few video calls with you over the next few months," Greg explained. "You could review our drafts and tell us what makes sense and what doesn't. We'd pay you as a consultant, of course." "Pay me?" Jayden's eyes widened. "But I'm just a kid." "A kid with expertise we need," Diane pointed out. "Age doesn't matter when someone has valuable knowledge to share." They talked more about the project, with Jayden already offering suggestions about using pictures and simple examples to explain complicated rules. He was so engrossed in the conversation that he didn't notice his mother slip quietly into the room until she placed her hand on his shoulder. "How's it going in here?" she asked. "Mom, they want to pay me to help them." "Like a real job," Jayden exclaimed. Dr. Thomas raised her eyebrows, looking at the airline representatives. "Is that so?" Diane and Greg explained their proposal in more detail, emphasizing that the work would be structured around Jayden's school schedule and would only take a few hours each month. "We've already cleared it with our legal department," Greg added. "Since he'd be a consultant rather than an employee, his age isn't an issue, and of course, you would be involved every step of the way." By the end of the meeting, details had been arranged for a first official consultation call the following month. Jayden left the room clutching a business card from each of the representatives and feeling taller somehow, as if he'd grown an inch during the conversation. "I can't believe they're going to pay me," he said again as they headed back to the hotel to pack for their flight home that afternoon. "It's not just about the money though, is it?" Dr. Thomas asked knowingly. Jayden shook his head. "No, it's about helping people understand their rights. Like Grandpa always says, knowledge only matters if people can use it." Back at the hotel, they were packing their suitcases when there was a knock at the door. Dr. Thomas opened it to find a hotel staff member with a large envelope. "Special delivery for Jayden Thomas," the young man announced, handing over the envelope with a flourish. Jayden opened it curiously. Inside was a letter on the hotel's elegant stationery and a certificate naming him an honorary legal advisor to the hotel. "The hotel manager was impressed by your knowledge," Dr. Thomas explained, reading over his shoulder. "It seems you've made quite an impression on everyone here in Chicago." As they rode to the airport in a taxi, Jayden was quieter than usual, staring out the window at the city buildings they passed. "Penny for your thoughts?" his mother asked, using one of his grandfather's favorite phrases. "I was just thinking," Jayden said slowly, "about how differently things could have gone on the plane. If I hadn't spoken up, we might have had to move seats, and that wouldn't have been fair." "That's true," Dr. Thomas nodded, "but also," he continued, "if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been on TV or met the judge or gotten to help the airline. So something that started out bad turned into something really good." Dr. Thomas smiled, proud of her son's perspective. "Life works that way sometimes. The challenges we face can lead to unexpected opportunities." At the airport, they were treated like VIPs. The airline had arranged for them to use the first-class check-in counter, and a special escort guided them through security to a comfortable lounge where they could wait for their flight. The captain requested that you both board early, their escort explained. He'd like to make good on the promise to show Jayden the cockpit before other passengers arrive. The cockpit tour was everything Jayden had hoped for. The captain and co-pilot showed him all the instruments, explained how the controls worked, and even let him sit in the captain's seat for a moment. Maybe you'll be flying planes someday instead of practicing law, the co-pilot suggested with a wink. I think I'd rather help make the rules that keep flying safe for everyone, Jayden replied thoughtfully. As they settled into their upgraded first-class seats, Dr. Thomas noticed a familiar face boarding the plane, the disruptive passenger, from their flight to Chicago. He stopped short when he saw them, clearly embarrassed. To her surprise, the man approached their seats. "Excuse me," he said, his voice much quieter than it had been during the incident. "I owe you both an apology. My behavior on the flight here was inexcusable." Jayden looked up at him with curious eyes, not angry but cautious. "I was having a terrible day," the man continued, "but that's no excuse for how I treated you. Especially," he looked at Jayden, "when a child showed more maturity than I did. I'm sorry." "Thank you for apologizing," Jayden said sincerely. "My grandpa says everyone makes mistakes. What matters is learning from them." The man nodded, seeming genuinely moved by Jayden's response. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." He hesitated, then added, "I saw you on the news yesterday. You're going to do great things someday, kid." After the man continued to his seat, Dr. Thomas squeezed Jayden's hand. "I'm proud of how you handled that. Forgiveness takes as much courage as standing up for yourself." The flight home was smooth and peaceful. Jayden spent part of it drawing up ideas for kid-friendly airline rules in his notebook, with stick figures demonstrating different situations and simple explanations beside each picture. As the plane began its descent toward home, Jayden looked out at the sunset, painting the clouds in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Mom," he said suddenly, "do you think I could write a book someday? About kids' rights and stuff? So other kids would know, when they're allowed to speak up?" "I think that's a wonderful idea," Dr. Thomas smiled. "We could talk to Grandpa about it when we get home." The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and passengers broke into the traditional round of applause. Several people who recognized Jayden from the news or their original flight nodded or smiled at him as they disembarked. In the arrivals area, a familiar figure waited, Grandpa Richard, tall and distinguished with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Jayden ran ahead, throwing himself into his grandfather's arms. "Grandpa, I have so much to tell you. I used what you taught me and it worked. And I met a real judge and she gave me a gavel and the airline wants me to help them and—" "Whoa, slow down." Grandpa Richard laughed, lifting Jayden up in a bear hug. "Sounds like you had quite an adventure." "The biggest," Jayden exclaimed. "And it all happened because you taught me about standing up for what's right." Dr. Thomas joined them, hugging her father. "He was amazing, Dad. You would have been so proud." "I'm always proud," Grandpa Richard said, setting Jayden down and taking his hand. "But I'd love to hear the whole story. How about ice cream on the way home?" As they walked through the terminal, Jayden between his mother and grandfather, holding their hands, he felt a deep contentment. The adventure in Chicago had been exciting, but the real treasure was right here. A family that believed in justice, in standing up for what's right, and in the power of knowledge to make the world better. "Grandpa," Jayden said as they reached the parking lot, "remember how you always say knowledge is like a superpower?" "I do," Grandpa Richard nodded. "I think I understand that better now," Jayden said solemnly. "It's not just knowing things. It's about using what you know to help people." Grandpa Richard squeezed his hand, eyes shining with pride. "That's exactly right, Jayden. And from what your mother tells me, you've already started using your superpower to change the world." As they drove away from the airport, Jayden knew this wasn't the end of his journey. In fact, it felt more like a beginning. The first chapter of a life dedicated to using knowledge to help others, to stand up for what's right, and to make the world a little more fair for everyone. And for an 8-year-old boy with a head Full of facts and a heart full of courage, there could be no greater adventure.